Hello, everyone. Welcome to the very first episode of You Don't Joe Music. This is the only podcast on the internet that's about music. There are no other ones but mine. In a world where everyone and their grandma has a podcast and they all have unique gimmicks and they're competing and pining for attention, I decided to choose as ubiquitous a topic as possible to stand out by not standing out. We are broadcasting this episode of You Don't Joe Music from my private space station floating above the planet Earth, but it might as well be a 5-mile-tall thoroughbred because I'm certainly looking down on all you little people with a sense of superiority. While I was sitting here pondering my intellect, I thought, what a great time to record the first episode of the podcast I've been wanting to do for a while now. But before we get to this first episode, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Nothing. Nothing is odorless, tasteless, takes up absolutely no room at all, and best of all, it's free. So go out and get yourself some Nothing today. Today we're going to be talking about Radiohead, and we're going to be reviewing not just one album, but two. In the industry, this is what we call a 1-2 punch. It's oft not attempted. And I'm going to be doing it for the very first episode because I like to go one step beyond everybody else. Some background about Radiohead. First of all, these guys are from Milwaukee. I'm from Milwaukee, so I gotta throw them a little respect. Basically, Radiohead is a grunge rock group that started in the 90s. And they sort of had a little bit of a following after they released a single called Creep. But they didn't really explode into the pop culture zeitgeist until they were featured on the popular television show, The Big Bang Theory. After this point, everybody knew who Radiohead was. And I'll admit I've heard some of their songs in the radio, especially from my friends, and I've kind of stayed away. I've avoided them like the plague because I thought that they were kind of edgy. And around the time that I heard about them and heard some of their songs, I was kind of staying away from like edgier content. I kind of like when music has more of an ebb and flow to it. And I'm not saying that they're all sad because I have not listened to Radiohead until now. This is my first time sitting down and actually listening to their albums, not just some out-of-context songs. So I listened to the first two, Pablo Honey and The Bends. So we're going to be reviewing both of those today. I'll admit, most of the reason why I'm deciding to do both albums instead of just one is because I don't really have a lot to say about their first album, Pablo Honey. So let's get into that so we can get it out of the way so we can talk about the one I actually want to talk about, which is The Bends. I just thought for comprehensive sake, since I'd like to go through their discography, that I would start with the first one. And I was hoping it would sort of grab me, but I can't say it really did. Pablo Honey, first of all, I have to talk about is this cover. What the heck is this cover? Maybe somebody could explain this to me in the comments or something. It looks like it's like for people who haven't seen the cover, you can look it up, but for people who haven't seen it, I'll describe it. It's basically like a little kid's head in like a sunflower thing. It's not really a sunflower, but it kind of looks like a sunflower or something of that nature. And it's got this really ridiculous font that's got this real grunge sort of punchy. It looks totally different than their other covers. It says Radiohead, Pablo Honey. It kind of looks like a 20 best songs for kids. Order now and you can get an extra copy. Call 4411 20 best songs to pick up now. That's kind of what the cover reminds me of. It's a bit of a silly cover. And it also reminds me of the Teletubbies son with the baby's face on it. So If I was just rating the album based off the cover, pretty bad. I was kind of confused when I saw their cover. It doesn't really look like their other covers. I'm like, man, they're really kind of finding their footing with this first album, and I hoped that would not be true sonically, that it would be a very good album. But as I said before, this one didn't quite grab me. I was a little confused what the big deal with Radiohead was after hearing this album. But anyway, let's just talk about the album a little bit. So it starts off with You, which is sort of like it kind of crawls in. It is a good track. It kind of crawls in, and it's kind of a little bit more bombastic than some of the other tracks on the album. So I like this one, but it definitely gets overshadowed right away by Creep, which is, of course, the very famous track. A lot of people who maybe not even know who Radiohead is have probably heard Creep. It's a pretty famous song. Creep, it's kind of one of those things where I can't talk to it about it too much because I wasn't hearing it for the first time. I was hearing it for the 100th time. Unlike every other song in this album, which I had never heard before, this one, it's one of those things where when you approach a band and you have their most popular song and you've heard it before, so hearing it within the context of the album is always interesting. But the fact that it starts right off the bat with Creep, with as the second track, it didn't like change much of my thoughts. But I guess I should say it didn't really change much of my thoughts. I definitely understood why it stood out because it is one of the better tracks on the album. It's debatable if it's the best track on the album, but I thought it probably was, if I'm being honest. But some people might like some of the other songs that we'll get to in a second. Creep, it's a classic. It's good. It's got melancholy lyrics, and it's got sort of this catchy vibe, but it's a good sort of like depressing, grungy song. But it's not aggressive grunge like some of the other stuff on the album. It is definitely a slower moment, even though it's very early. I think Creep kind of starts this thing that Radiohead has on both of these first two albums, where they kind of get to this moment where everything builds up really fast, and then you hear Thom Yorke go in the background. And that's something that's featured in quite a few tracks on these first couple albums. It's sort of a really punchy, sort of easy way to have an emotional moment. And this definitely carries over into a band I'm more familiar with, which is Muse. Definitely carries over into their music, and I'm sure into a lot of other 90s and early 2000s rock bands that were sort of inspired by Radiohead. That sort of build all the instruments at once, and then it's very common on this first album, and these first couple albums for sure. But I definitely noticed it for the first time on Creep here, and it comes back. How Do You Do is definitely kind of a filler track. Again, I'm only talking about both of these because there's kind of so little to say about some of these songs. Because How Do You Do is really just kind of there. It was definitely an in the out ear, in one ear, out the other. Stop Whispering, though, is one of the highlights, although I put highlights in quotes when talking about Pablo Honey. Ouch, sorry. That was a little rude to poor Pablo Honey here, but it is one of the highlights of the song. I would say it is as the name implies, it kind of comes out swinging. It's a little bit more punchy, I think, as a track. I like this one. But then it immediately transitions into Thinking About You, which I would put in the how do you category, I guess. It's kind of just there. I don't really have a lot to say about it. Next, we have a track that called Anyone can play guitar. That I actually liked this one. It's got sort of it's difficult to explain, like almost like a heavenly feel to it, to the lyrics and some of the instrumentals, but it kind of had, it's definitely a 90s rock song for sure, but it kind of had something a little bit like unique to it. And I believe the message of this song, where they got the title from, is from the film Ratatouille, which I think Radiohead said they were a big fan of Ratatouille. Uh, Not anyone can play guitar, but a good guitar player can come from anywhere. So that is a powerful message. Ripcord, Vegetable, these two kind of blend together. Actually, the next four tracks, I'm just going to say Ripcord, Vegetable, Prove Yourself, I Can't. They really blended together for me. This is where the album really slows down and it kind of just becomes one song after the other with sort of similar subject matter. Vegetable is, of course, not talking about the fun kind of vegetable that you eat. It's talking about like the human kind of vegetable. Um, and all these songs kind of come to a head, and I Can't. These four tracks are definitely kind of similar to each other. And when they were on, I was really getting bored with the album at this point, and wishing for something better when Lurgy came in. Lurgy, I would say, is one of the highlights, although it isn't. The singing in the song is not great. I think it's a little high pitched or something. I thought the song kind of, it made me feel an emotion. It made me feel the protagonist's hope that things are getting better, and it sort of was a bit of a light at the end of the tunnel kind of song after an album that is just unrelentingly sort of sad, mopey, grungy tracks. Lurgy kind of stood out just as something that sounded a little different from everything else, and the lyrics certainly are a little bit more happy on Lurgy. So Lurgy was one of the standouts for me as well. So from Anyone Can Play Guitar to Lurgy, those were my highlights, and then for this whole section here. And then the track, the album, sorry. The album ends with a very good track called Blowout, which is sort of just this building sort of end of a movie kind of track, end of an album kind of a track, where everything kind of builds and builds and builds and builds and builds to this like blowout conclusion. The title of the song is very appropriate for what the song is like. And I really like this one. This is yet another one, though, where the music kind of revs up and you kind of hear Thom Yorke in the background going, "Ah," and it's very emotional. But I have to say, already by Blowout, that kind of emotional moment was a little bit less emotional, just because I feel like I had already kind of heard it before. So that is it. 42 minutes and 15 seconds, 1993. This is from Radiohead's first album, Pablo Honey. Honestly, like I said, I didn't have a lot to say. I think Creep. My thoughts on Pablo Honey is, I get why Creep was so popular, because the rest of the album really is not much to write home about. It's not bad. It's good. It's just not great or that worth talking about. And I only revisited this album a couple times before doing this review. You can probably tell how I don't really have a lot to say about certain sections, just because they aren't worth talking about to me. But I would say, if you're looking for the best tracks, it's definitely You, Creep, Stop Whispering, Anyone Can Play Guitar, and Lurgy and Blowout. Though I would say Lurgy is probably on the lowest end of the good songs, just because it stood out to me and it made me feel an emotion I felt for the person. But I can definitely see somebody not really liking the singing in this song. I didn't think that it was very great singing. But I listened to both of these albums for the first time. I listened to both these albums back to back. And I popped on The Bends, which comes out in 1995. So now I was sort of not excited about starting The Bends. It was like 3 a.m. in the morning, and I'm sitting there, and oh boy, I don't know if I want to listen to another mopey, sort of sad album that's just kind of like every 90s grunge rock album you've heard. And again, it's not bad, it's just that Pablo Honey was just not stand out. Nothing about it was very special to me. And I thought this band was supposed to be very special, and I was sort of disappointed a little bit by how normal sounding the whole album was. It just kind of sounded like it was very similar to its contemporaries, and it didn't really grab me. Only a couple tracks here and there were really getting me. Then I turn on The Bends, and this song, Planet Telex, starts. And the wave of excitement and emotion that came over me was completely different than the first album. It was like suddenly I had new life breathed into me, and I was like, "Oh, this is Radiohead." I think this is really when they become who they are, who they're seen as. Because for me, this album really it was quite good. But Planet Telex, especially right off the bat, blew me away. So it starts with these like really spacey sort of like guitar riff, and then like, I don't know, it's like it's got this like feeling like you're flying through space, and you're like bursting forth past Mars and the moon, and then you see Earth and you fly towards it. And then these like really distorted vocals sort of come in, you know. You can be a monkey, ooh, ooh, ah, ah. You can eat all of the bananas. And I'm just like, oh. And it sort of starts to paint this like really cool picture of an entire sort of planet Telex, the whole planet of Earth, and everybody is sad. And the lyrics are of course saying everyone is broken, everything is broken. Those are the lyrics, and it has this sort of colossal epic feeling to it, but at the same time it's very melancholy, but in a unique way. It isn't just that the first album was sad that I didn't like. It was just that it didn't feel uniquely sad. Planet Telex feels uniquely sad, and it has this energy to it. And I was like, it was 3 a.m., but I was super into this track. I was very excited, and I was really just ready to hear the rest of the album. So Planet Telex, amazing track. We'll talk about the rest of the tracks on the album, but it might be my favorite off of the album just because I had such an emotional reaction to it. And yeah, that had to do with the context of what I was listening to, which is why I spent so much time sort of setting up what my thoughts on the previous album were and what my context for listening to Planet Telex was. But going into the Bends, you hear sort of these seagulls, and it sort of sets this scene up. And you kind of hear these like echoey sort of guitars, and I would say that the riffs on this album are very 80s, and there's sort of a dad rock or like a boomer sort of energy to this track that I didn't like at first. It didn't feel like the first track. It's definitely was sort of a like I said, very 80s sort of rock song. But something about it really worked for me. Not that it was bad, but something about it really started to work for me when you combine sort of the seagulls, and then you got that sort of echoey microphone as well, and the echoey guitar, and you sort of like, I began to paint this picture in my head of maybe this is a a bar, because the song is a very beer belly sort of song to me. It's very a sit and drink a beer and listen to this in the garage kind of a song. Uh, uh, Once again, these guys are from Milwaukee. You can tell when you're listening to the Bends because this song is very it's very Wisconsin. It's very Midwest to me is how it felt, and I sort of distanced myself from that kind of music just because I listened to so much of it growing up. So, but I sort of began to paint that picture of maybe this is playing in a bar, and the main character who thinks what the band is singing is sitting at a bar having a drink, and this song is so echoey and the microphones are so echoey because this is a band that's playing the song live. And the Bends, to me, has that sort of live show quality. And I sort of imagine myself in a drunken stupor as the protagonist, drinking and knocking them back. And this band is playing, and the seagulls are outside. And the smell of the rank lake or ocean or whatever outside is filling my nostrils when I'm listening to this song. And it really got me as the song continued. Um, there was something very powerful about starting with Planet's Helix, which is this sort of like everyone is broken, everything is broken. Like I said, an epic sort of song to start the song, and then immediately switching to this much more intimate, much more relatable section. This and the rest of the album continues like that. It is a lot of it is not one big story the same way Pablo Honey kind of feel like. To me, that felt more like one big story. This is more like a series of vignettes that are all separate from each other, but all kind of have a similar theme. And the Bends is sort of the beginning of that. So the Bends I really liked, and that's not just talking about how the the vocals and everything work together was very nice. It does have a very appealing sound. Baby's got the Bends, and it's a very catchy song, and I definitely like that. But I definitely liked the feeling that it created more than anything. Next, we transitioned into High and Dry, which definitely dips down a little bit for me compared to the first two tracks. It's got this sort of strummy, slow guitar to it, and I found it to be like one of those early 2000s comedy road trip trailer songs, and I could see the shot of a van driving along the road through some woods or something with this song playing over it, and some jokes are in there, and the high-pitched vocals from Thom Yorke on this track I found to be very unappealing and kind of ugly sounding. This song is definitely a little bit slower than the first two, and as a slow moment, I just found it to be kind of weak, especially um, there could have maybe been one more exciting track before High and Dry to lulls us down, but instead it's kind of a boring track to have early on, but it's especially not strong when we put it up against Fake Plastic Trees, which is also a very high-pitched sort of song. It's also very melancholy, and it's very acoustic and slow, but I found that track to be much better. In fact, it's easily one of the highlights on the album. Fake Plastic Trees has this sort of it's snowing outside, and you're inside an apartment, and you're dancing with a girl, and the girl you're dancing with, you kind of love each other, but you both hurt each other a lot, and it's sort of like a sad scene from a movie where they're dancing together slowly, but they know that they're not, that they will drift apart, but for now they're kind of hugging each other together. That's what Fake Plastic Trees sounds like, and the lyrics certainly sort of support that. She's my fake plastic love, this is my fake plastic whatever. you know it is a very melancholy song. It's sort of like the idea of finding fake happiness, and things that you feel like should put you at ease, but they don't, and they don't really make the sad parts in your life and the depressed feelings and the suicidal thoughts go away. Fake plastic love being sort of like a woman that you're maybe staying with, because it makes you comfortable and not necessarily because it makes you truly happy. That's what Fake Plastic Trees sounds like to me. Bones is up next, and this one is also very good, but I don't really have a lot to say about it, so I'm just going to skip to the next track. Nice Dream. Nice Dream. I want to like Nice Dream. I do like Nice Dream, but there was a little detail, a little Easter egg I noticed in Nice Dream that really distracted me from this song. So it has this sort of like and I'm listening to this and I'm like, what does this sound like to me? Something about this sounds really familiar. Have I heard this song before? Because I was sure I'd heard none of the songs on this album before. And I'm just sitting there like, what the heck is this? And I'm listening, I'm going in the sun tonight we are young. And I hate that song. And I hate Fun. So just because sort of some parts of it kind of bear a similarity to that song, I really did not like this song. I found it distracting, but it definitely does turn into something away from that. It is a more complex sound than that. In general, something I really wanted to talk about on the album, just as an aside here, is how complex all the songs are. Nice Dream doesn't stick with that for very long before it's moving on to something else, and it brings that element back, but it is a complex sound, and all the songs sort of have a complex sound. The next song is Just, which I'm sure is supposed to be just like justice is just. But I like to think that the song is got sort of a hyphen on the end of it, as if Thom Yorke is saying, just, okay, just. So that's what I like to imagine just being like. Just stands out for me a little bit because it is kind of an angry track. The other songs have been very... it's very somber and sort of kind of felt self-blamey. And maybe the you, because this song has a lot of you in it, maybe the you they're talking about is them talking to themselves. I'm not exactly sure, but it is definitely an angry track. It's an angry track. So it really stood out compared to the first two albums, really. It's very intense compared to the other songs. I really liked it. I think that it was a nice change of pace without really, it didn't abandon the identity of the album sonically, but it's definitely like it's just sort of a more hard hitting kind of thing. My Iron Lung has these awesome, like, again, with the complex sounds, it's got this like bass line, but it's got this like awesome sort of jazzy piano or keyboard, definitely keyboard, like these jazzy sort of keyboard hits to it in the backgrounds. It's like dun 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 dun, and then it's got this like bass line, and it's got this just it's got this really cool sound. So I really liked My Iron Lung a lot. I thought it was a very, very good track. And then we move into Bulletproof, I Wish I Was, which is yet another sort of slower song, and I liked this one a lot, even though the My Iron Lung is definitely a very somber song, but I thought Bulletproof, I Wish I Was definitely moves into more like High and Dry and Fake Plastic Trees sort of somber, that sort of slow, like acoustic sort of sound to it. But I really liked the high-pitched vocals on this one. Something I've noticed so far is that the high-pitched vocals for Thom Yorke are very hit or miss for me. Sometimes for High and Dry and stuff, I don't really like them, and then on certain songs like Fake Plastic Trees and Bulletproof, I Wish I Was, I really enjoy those ones. I think he's best when he's sort of elongating it's difficult to explain. So just he's kind of like carrying out the vowels a little bit. I wish I was. And something about that's my bad York impression. I know I've been doing bad York impressions the whole podcast, but just so you know, it sounds better when you're listening to it, I'm sure. But Bulletproof, I Wish I Was. I really, really like this one. I kind of feel like that title. It's almost like a Bulletproof. I wish I was sort of immune to pain. I wish, because the whole album is very like sad. It's very somber. Bulletproof. I wish I was sort of like. I wish I didn't let all this stuff get to me. I wish it didn't hurt me like the way it does. And I think that's very relatable. I think that The Bends is certainly an album sort of about almost like depression and stuff like that. It's a very intense sort of somber. But I think that songs like Bulletproof sort of are a little bit more relatable. I feel like the common man can listen to that and go, yeah, me too. Black Star doesn't stand out too much to me. It's just sort of a grungy track on it, on the album. I don't really have a lot to say about this one, so let's just skip to Sulk, which has this really cool sound at the beginning. This like, sort of like echoey, like vibrating, like, it's like a guitar or something. I don't know. It just got just sort of like sinks. It's this sinking sort of sound. It sinks into the background. It sinks through your ears, and it sinks away from you, and then it comes back, and then it sinks again. And I really, really, really liked that sound. But as for the rest of the song, it's just kind of okay. But I love the beginning. I think it's got a great beginning. Street Spirit, Fade Out, is very similar to the previous album ender, Pablo Honey's Blowout. They both have out as the last word, and very similar. It's a rev up sort of song, and it's all the instruments come together. And if you've heard them do this sort of shtick before throughout these two albums, it's sort of the culmination of that. And it fades out. It certainly fades out, and it's an album ender. That's what it sounds like. It sounds like it's sort of okay. It's bringing everything to a close, and it's sort of getting into that planetelic sort of. The rest of the album has been very intimate, and now we're sort of, okay, now we're getting more colossal again, and we're sort of like everything kind of sucks kind of a feeling with Street Spirit. And it sort of fades out. So that was The Bends, 1995, 48 minutes and 39 seconds, a little bit longer than their previous release, and definitely a lot better. The Bends is a extremely good album. I really, really liked this one. It was surprising how much better it is than the first album. So something I've really heard is Pablo Honey from Radiohead fans are sort of that, like, people pretend like it's not good, but it is pretty good. But I have to say, this is the first time and this is just from people that I've seen, this is the first time I've listened to the two albums, and it's night and day, the quality difference between the Bends and Pablo Honey. I absolutely think it's not some Radiohead elitist sort of thing. I definitely found the first album, Pablo Honey, to be very boring in comparison to the Bends. Pablo Honey is a lot of very similar tracks. The Bends are a bunch of tracks that are very different from each other, but all come together to form a nice cohesive piece. It's just that they all have a unique sort of sound to them, and a complex sound, like I said. And yeah, that could be a criticism against the album. It does feel a little bit less like it's all flowing together compared to some other albums I've heard, but like Igor, for example, sort of has the same sound throughout the whole thing, but I think it works in a unique way. Like I said, it gives each song a feeling like it is a vignette. You are sort of peeking into the life of each of the protagonists. of the songs, which all feel like separate protagonists in a way, and they don't really feel like, and I'm sure it could be the same person, but they all kind of feel like they're different, and the first song doesn't really even have a protagonist, like, and the last song doesn't either. Like I said, it sort of begins and ends with this large scope, and then then the whole album itself in the middle is that's sandwiched in between is sort of a bunch of more personal, more individual stories. And I really thought that worked, and I really, really liked this album a lot. So, to give number ratings to both the albums, and I hate number ratings, but I'm sure a lot of people want to hear what the number ratings are. I would say Pablo Honey, I'm going to give a harsh 5 out of 10, maybe even a 4 out of 10, I would say. I'm going to give it a 5 just because it's not bad, but it's not great. I think 5 is the perfect number for it because it's just so indifferent to me. The bands I really, really enjoy. There are only a couple weak tracks on here. High and Dry, Black Star, Sulk, the second half a little bit, Bones maybe, yeah. But other than that, I mean, the rest of the album is extremely good, and none of the songs are all bad. None of the songs I dislike completely. All of them have something in it that I thought was pretty good, but I have to say, it may be that sort of that less connected sort of feeling of the album leaves it a little bit less punchy as a full project, but it is very, very good. So I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10, just because I don't think it like quite blew me out of the water, but it certainly is really, really good. So I think an 8 out of 10 is where I sit on that. But before we wrap everything up, I'm going to do a section called Village People. We're going to look at some comments I found on both of the albums and sort of see what the Village People had to say about these first couple albums. So Ruben Hayward says about Pablo Honey, this is some real clothes store music. Yeah, that echoey sort of somber, sad, it definitely sounds like it should be playing out of a low-quality speaker while you're shopping for clothes, doesn't it? And I think that's a bigger burn than I could have possibly given the album. Welch's Game Juice says, to me, Radiohead's least enjoyable album by far, and still amazing stuff. I agree with the first half of this. Somebody says Blowout sounds like something Peaky says Blowout sounds like something you'd hear on an elevator. Again, that's sort of like, it kind of goes in one ear and out the other, doesn't it? William Gibson says, pretty much your standard English indie angst-ridden stuff if it wasn't for Creep, which is immaculate and raises it up into the stratosphere. It is alone the price of admission, a worthy introduction to the wondrousness that will come with the bends. William, you're giving Creep a little bit too much credit. I agree, Creep is very good. But the idea that one single track off of an album raises it up into the stratosphere, I think is insane. It's okay to say, I can see why this one song is very good and the rest of the album kind of, I could do without it. But I agree. It is not a worthy introduction, but it is certainly an introduction to the wonderness that will come with the bends. I would say the bends, to me, what I liked about it is that it definitely felt like the introduction to Radiohead. Pablo Honey felt like Radiohead before they were Radiohead. They are finding their footing. They're kind of doing what everybody else is doing. They're kind of doing the Kurt Cobain sort of, they're doing that kind of thing. And I think that the Bends is the one where you go, okay, this is really something different. Super Gigawatt says, God gave this to us when music was something. Where are we now? So Super Gigawatt, he loves this album and he wishes that we could go back to these days. Well, I can't say I really agree. I certainly enjoy plenty of albums that come out now more than this one. That's for sure. But, you know, to each his own. He's definitely, I think, one of those rocker kids. Yeah. And then Jesus Del Rio T says, it's not that bad. So, yeah, I agree, Jesus. How silly is knowing this is the best Radiohead album, says Shimbo Satellites. And then SS Sekis says, it isn't. Trust me. Again, this is a very common thing I see on Pablo Honey is the idea that everybody else just doesn't like it. Here we have Blue Hacker saying, yes, it is, even though, quote-unquote, elite Radiohead fans love to claim otherwise. This idea, this is interesting, as an outsider coming in, the idea that these sort of elite Radiohead fans that have listened to all the albums look down upon this one from their pedestal, even though the truth is that this very accessible album is actually the best one because it's the most enjoyable and the most ordinary. I resent that idea. Coming into this album, not really knowing what I was in for, not really knowing what the general consensus was, I assumed that everybody just loved Pablo Honey, and I really thought it was very boring. It was only looking at these comments where I was like, okay, it seems like some people agree. I've listened to 2 of the Radiohead albums. So I've only listened to the Bends after this. I have not listened to the rest yet. And I certainly thought the Benz was much better. I don't think it's this elitist attitude that's convincing people otherwise. I think that saying that is a bit small-minded. I think the album just needs to stand for itself, and I think that it really doesn't. Moving on to the Village People, what they had to say about the Benz. Micah Boozin says, sort of summarizing what we've been talking about here, I love Pablo Honey, but the amount of growth from Pablo Honey to the Benz is kind of mind-blowing. And that's as a person who loves Pablo Honey, but certainly thinks the Benz really stepped it up, and I agree. Mind-blowing is exactly what I would say is the transition to specifically to Planet Telex, which I think somebody points out here. Kane128 says the step up from Pablo Honey to Planet Telex alone blows me away. That summarized my thoughts exactly, so I thought that was interesting. Somebody else had the exact same mind-blowing experience stepping from the whole album of Pablo Honey to just that one song. DG Zombie says, one of best album in this world. And he capitalized best in album. So and the rest of it is lowercase. And then he put a space in between this comment and an exclamation mark. So that's a bit weird. This is one of the top album of all times. A true masterpiece, says Scott Wood. I don't know about that, but I get it. Scott's passionate. Maro Alvilia says, for some reason, guess this album is underrated. It's brilliant. I'm not sure if it's underrated. It seems like everybody really likes it. Underrated is one of those terms that seems to sort of have lost its meaning over time to me. The cover has always creeped me out, but the music, I'll admit, is fucking great, says Proto Dodo. Good thing I read this comment because I totally forgot to talk about the cover, which is, yes, ridiculous, but I actually really like it compared to the first album. It's sort of this like weird CGI-looking guy, and he looks like he's having an orgasm, and then it just says Radiohead the Benz, and that's it. He's got some kind of device on his upper sort of chest there, but I can't really make out what it is that he's got on him, but it's maybe sucking the energy out of him or something. But it is such a strange cover, but I kind of like it just because it is so weird. But I agree, it kind of creeps you out a little bit, and then you're like, what the heck? Garcia Williams says, anybody who knows me knows I love Radiohead. And this is true. I've met Miss Williams, and yeah, she loves Radiohead. Maybe a little too much. Maybe a little too much. Every T-shirt she owns is a Radiohead shirt, and I've been to her house. Radiohead posters all over the wall. It was kind of creeping me out a little bit. And then she pressed these 3 keys on her piano in her living room, and this whole section opened up in the wall, and it was this shrine to Thom Yorke. And I said, Miss Williams, I think my mom's calling, and I ran away. So yes, she certainly likes Radiohead a lot. But that's about it for the people, and that is what the Village people had to say about these first 2 albums. A lot of stuff I agreed with, some stuff I disagreed with, but I think it's interesting to take a look at what the general populace thinks versus what I think, and see if it matches, where it matches up, and where it sort of differs. Because again, I am better than all of you, sitting in this $1 million spaceship that I own myself, and it's private to me, where I can just sit here and listen to Radiohead all day. So I certainly have a better perspective on it than you little people do. But it is interesting to see that even the common folk agree with me on a lot of things that I have to say, and some of them disagree, but I think that the general consensus seems to be Pablo Honey, kind of weak. The Ben's very good. So that was about it for the first episode of You Don't Joe Music. I have a long journey home to Earth after this. I am going to shoot myself out of the airlock and fly down. It's going to be very exciting, so I have to get to that. So that was just my thoughts on the first 2 Radiohead albums. Let me know what you thought in the comments below. And I'd love to hear what other people have to say about these albums. And if you haven't heard them, I would definitely recommend the Bends to check that out. But other than that, this has been You Don't Joe Music. I'm your host, Joseph Oliver, signing off.